This conference will now be recorded.
Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today on accessory dwelling units. We're very excited to present on this topic and to see that so many people were also excited to hear about it because we have so many of you sign up. So thank you for being here today. And like it was mentioned, we did have to change our platform because of the popularity of the event. And just make sure you mute yourselves because we're not able to do so. So just make sure you are muted so we can have the webinar without interruptions. So this event today is brought to you by the Orlando Metro section of APA Florida. And my name is Tammy. I'm a planner in St. Cloud, Florida, and I also serve in the OMS board as the Osceola director. So I'm excited to have this event today and for the presenters that we have. They each bring a unique perspective and they have really good experience and lessons learned to share it with us. We will share at the end of the presentations a link to a Google Drive folder where you can access the presentation today. Also handouts that they prepared for you. So we'll have that. We'll just send the link over the chat at the end. And we will hear from the presenters back to back. So please save your questions for the last part of the meeting. So once we hear from our final speaker, we'll open up for questions, and then we would love to hear what you have to say and the questions that you have. And for your convenience, the CM credit number is on the screen for you. So I'll let each presenter just briefly introduce themselves, and then we can get started with Ali from the Florida Housing Coalition.
Okay, great. Well, I'll go ahead and get started with introductions here. My name is Ali Ankadovich. I'm a technical advisor with the Florida Housing Coalition. Pleased to be here today. And thank you to APA Florida Orlando Metro section for hosting this event.
Okay, I'm Susan Caswell. I'm with Osceola County, Director of Sustainability, formerly from Community Development.
Hi, I'm Taylor Jones. I'm with Planner with Orange County. I'm just happy to be presenting today.
And I'm Carter Gresham. I'm also a planner in the planning division and the placemaking division at Orange County.
Okay, this is Paul Lewis. I'm a Chief Planning Manager with the City of Orlando in our City Planning Division.
And my name is Jessica Fry. I'm the Housing Initiative Manager with the Housing Department at the City of Orlando.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get us kicked off here today. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to start with a high-level policy and funding overview, very, very high level. Hopefully in the handouts, you'll see a more in-depth training link, or you can find it on our website where we will go in much more detail on those topics. And then you'll hear from all these great case studies we have lined up for you today. Next slide. And before I get started, I just want to thank the Florida Housing Finance Corporation. They make our participation in these events possible through funding from their Catalyst program. So thanks, FHFC. Next slide. And a little bit more about the Florida Housing Coalition. In case you're not familiar with us, we are a statewide nonprofit who provides training and technical assistance to local governments and nonprofit developers in all things affordable housing. So we can help you comply with existing programs, create your own programs. We can assist with trying to get these units built in the case of nonprofit developers, and just research and data gathering and planning for affordable housing. So if you are a local government or a nonprofit developer, please feel free to reach out in terms of how we can assist you further. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we'll do a high-level overview. I'll hit some regulatory points and then end with some financing points. Next slide. Next slide. So just a little background on what type of units we're exactly talking about today. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are additional living space, so they're their own fully comprehensive unit that's usually accessory to a single family home and is independent. It's an independent unit and generally smaller accessory to the primary structure. So it can be within that primary home, it can be attached to it, detached to it. There could be more than one in some cases. So these units take a lot of different forms and formats. You'll see there on a screen a couple different ways that people refer to these sorts of units and how it might show up in your code. So if you're searching keywords in example codes and things like that, these are some terms you can try. And so really we're talking about adding an additional accessory unit on a parcel. Next slide. So why are we talking about ADUs? Affordability is one of the main reasons that a lot of communities are looking into ADUs, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a second, including if you're in the primary unit, you can generate rental income from renting out the ADU or vice versa. So there's some potential additional income generation that can come from these sorts of setups. Flexible on-site living arrangements. So a hot topic right now is multi-generational households and aging in place. And so this is an opportunity for older adults to downsize within their communities very easily or stay close to friends and family as they age. This is a great tool for infill development. So you may have single family neighborhoods, for instance, that are near downtown core areas where there's a lot of amenities and shopping and jobs. And so this is an opportunity to integrate some more units in those areas, for instance, and other zoning districts as well, not necessarily just single family, and get a mix of income levels. It expands what people can do with their properties and ultimately adds more housing into the supply. Next slide. So as I mentioned, a lot of communities are looking at this right now. And so this is just a sampling of recent major reforms to ADU ordinances that have happened in the past 3 years across the state. So if you're looking at ideas of what other folks are doing and how they're trying to reform to get more ADUs built, this is a great starting point. And you'll hear from some of these communities today. Next slide. So ADUs in the context of affordable housing is our main focus here at the coalition. So how do ADUs fit into the picture? First of all, there are a couple characteristics that make these units unique. And first is just their smaller size. So that is where some relative affordability comes from. These units tend to range from 400 to 1,000 square feet, give or take. They can be a little bigger, a little smaller. Another unique way in which these tend to be used is that they're often used for friends and family, and usually the rents for that are much lower than market rate rents. So you'll see a lot more of these units being offered for free for people to live in because of that. And that's something you just don't see a lot with other sorts of housing types. So those are two kind of unique ways in which ADUs bring more affordability into the mix. And then there's always the avenue of doing formal income restrictions with ADUs. So some programs that are out there have looked at providing assistance to build ADUs to homeowners in exchange for having those ADUs rented out for a certain amount of time to tenants that meet income eligibility requirements. For instance, maybe they're Section 8 voucher holders. So there's a few pilot programs out there that have kind of looked at making that work, and that also an option to just have income restrictions on ADUs generally, if that's a route you want to go. We'll talk about that in just a second. Just want to note here, though, that ADUs are just one tool in the affordability strategy. So it can be great for smaller households, for instance, but it may not meet the needs of larger families who also may need affordable housing in your community. So it should be one strategy and a range of options. And you'll see there on the right just an example of one way in which some of these programs I mentioned earlier are helping homeowners get these units off the ground, it might be through providing pre-designed floor plans that can be more easily integrated onto a site. So that's just one example of the assistance coming down in these programs. Next slide. So one last point on the affordability. This is a question that comes up, that has come up a few times for me. People ask me, well, aren't all ADUs supposed to be used for affordable housing because of state law? And so just wanted to touch on the ADU statute, which you see referenced there on the screen. A few years ago in 2020, House Bill 1339 made a strike-through adjustment to this statute, which was passed originally to encourage ADUs in single-family neighborhoods. And so due to the strike-through that was made, there was some opening up of interpretation of what this particular statute meant and how it might be interpreted. Arguably, one interpretation would be that it expanded the breadth of the statute to require every ADU to be used for affordable rental housing. So to that point, if that is something you've heard or a question you've had about ADUs, I'll just say city and county attorneys who are working on behalf of cities and counties who are regulating ADUs at the local level, of course, have different opinions about the effect of this strike through. There are obviously ordinances out there that do not consider all ADUs to be used only for affordable rental housing. But if that is something you are interested in, this is a provision that can provide some support in that regard. Next slide. And so just the pros and cons of that, if you were to go that route, you would get more guaranteed affordability. It could give you a little bit more backing to ban ADUs as short-term rentals in that case. However, on the flip side, it does limit significantly the use of these units, and so it may prevent them coming online. So that that's definitely something to consider if you're looking into that. Next slide. So now I'm just going to quickly go through some regulatory considerations, and the ultimate goal is, to get more ADUs. So if you've been trying to encourage ADUs and you're not seeing many come online, looking at the restrictiveness of your regulations may be one place to start, and then we'll talk about the funding barriers in just a second. So ultimately, trying to get more production of these units and regulations and how difficult they are to meet is part of that calculus. Next slide. So these first few are pretty large barriers often to ADUs. The first couple just being, are they just basically allowed? And so all your zoning districts where you do have single family homes is a great place to start in terms of where ADUs should be allowed in your code. And those should be able to be rented freely. So you may see some communities who have what are called guest houses or accessory units that are only for family or caretakers. And so that can limit the use of these units, and the flexibility of use is one major reason why a homeowner might undertake the journey and cost and expense of creating an ADU if it's not being provided by a developer upfront in new construction. So that flexibility of use is really important in terms of encouraging folks to take the plunge and build one of these. Owner occupancy requirements, I want to speak on this a little bit further. So owner occupancy requirements, those do again kind of limit how these units can be used, and it can limit the perception of value, added value from a lender's perspective, because an institution is not going to occupy a unit on site and thus wouldn't be able to rent it, for instance. So it does kind of mess with some of the value added, and that then can deter the building of these ADUs. One of the arguments for having an owner occupancy requirement is to avoid speculative investing and jacking up prices. Some of the counter argument to that is, that sort of requirement is not applied on other sorts of housing where you might also see that phenomenon. And then in the example of Portland, for instance, that's a mature ADU market that's kind of gone through a lot of these reform iterations. They were finding that that sort of speculation and owner occupancy wasn't really an issue. So they did remove that requirement. And a local example is Gainesville, who also recently removed that requirement. So you're starting to see more communities do that. The last two are pretty straightforward. By right approval, if a average homeowner has to go through a conditional use approval process or something like that, and there's maybe not a guarantee they'll be able to do it if they're following the regulations, that can be a barrier. And then just trying to fit any additional parking on site can make the site logistics not work out very well. So next slide. And then here are just a couple other considerations. How the maximum size of the unit is regulated is important. Sometimes that's a simple percentage of the primary unit, which can eliminate this option for some of the lots, particularly if there are smaller homes that might, on larger lots, that might benefit from being able to do an ADU. So often a absolute cap, like 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, can help address that issue. Minimum lot size requirements, if you're setting those too high, that might eliminate some of the lots, particularly some smaller urban lots that might be more conducive to infill. Same for setbacks. If the setbacks are very large, it can be difficult to fit a unit on the site. And then you'll see they're exempting from density calculations and waiving or right sizing the impact fees to reflect the smaller unit size. So you'll see that mentioned there. Next slide. And then last, I'm going to wrap up with financing. And so Cole Peterson, who's kind of the ADU whiz out in Portland, who's kind of researched that market and seen how it's evolved and helped lots of folks build ADUs, has this great analogy that financing an ADU is like asking someone to front cash for a Lamborghini. And so I think a lot of people would find that to be a pretty wild proposition. I know I would, but that's essentially what people are trying to figure out in undertaking this endeavor, is financing something that's pretty expensive, and there have historically been kind of limited financing options for this. Next slide. And so indeed, as shown here from some recent UC Berkeley research, recent survey of ADU owners in California, which is again a mature market where we can kind of see how some of this has played out, that's indicated that all the homeowners surveyed there pretty much were using liquid assets or financing tools that were built based on the equity built up in their home. So you'll see their liquid assets, over 62% we're using liquid assets. Mortgages based on equity were used oftentimes, and then you see some other funding sources there on the right have just dropped off significantly. So this does pose an equity issue in terms of accessing the ability to construct ADUs. Some lower income households who might benefit from having an ADU and some additional rental income from that, for instance, are not able to access this as easily. So that's a big issue being tackled in ADU programs currently. Next slide. And you'll see here some broader overview of some of the financing mechanisms. So you'll see the mortgage options that are typically used on the left there, renovation loans and construction loans, less so just because of some of the valuation issues, one of which is also including rental income from an ADU as part of the value on which a loan can be based. So some of the lending practices around that are currently being reevaluated, and that's kind of a new topic that's emerging. Currently, you have some shared equity models where entities will help fund in return for a share of rental proceeds, rental revenues, sale revenues. So there's some instances of that. You could bring a community land trust in the mix. And the last one to cover here is unsecured debt, such as credit cards. So even though this is not a recommended option, it is still used quite a bit. So this just kind of highlights the need for more loan options and more avenues in which to fund and get these things built. Next slide. So if you are in a position to consider supporting funding and financing options, just wanted to close out here with some program parameters that you might consider. So in terms of amount, repayment, and I want to highlight the repayment and eligibility. These are areas where you might consider incorporating a focus on lower income homeowners or lower income tenants who might rent an ADU or a home. So those are avenues if you want to focus more specifically and deeper on affordability. Next slide. And so happy to answer any questions. We have a more in-depth training on our website. If you have any trouble finding that, please feel free to email me and I'll be around for questions after. Thank you.
Oh, okay, this is me. Hi, everyone. I'm not going to turn my camera on because I'm a little under the weather, but I'm going to give you some information about accessory dwelling units and our experience in Osceola County. Oh, next slide. Just to cut to the chase, we made it very easy to build accessory dwelling units. We've had some requests over the past several years, but not really a lot. And so the next step for us is to look into how to further encourage construction. And there's a number of things that we would need to look at to try to figure out how to do that. This, by the way, is an ADU in Celebration. They have quite a few in there. Next slide. I'm not going to read through these, and Allie covered a lot of them anyway. I will say that when you look at the barriers on the left side, we've basically addressed all of those, except we do require owner occupancy. That's one of the ones that we do have. But one of the reasons I put this here, the link on the bottom is to a 12-part series on ADU research that actually I found very helpful. So if you want to download the presentation, you can learn a lot from that series. Next slide. So in Osceola County, we basically allow them by right in all residential categories, in mixed use categories, and in institutional. As I said, they have to be homesteaded, but you can rent out the unit. You can rent it out short term if you're in the short term rental overlay, which is in the very northwest part of the county, the tourist area. We don't have a minimum square footage. We eliminated minimum square footages from our code, but actually we missed this one because it was in the ADU part of the code. So when we realized it was still there, we eliminated it. 400 square feet is the size of a basic 2-car garage, which is, I think, why you see 400 square feet a lot. But we've got a tiny home builder in the area who builds Florida building code compliant homes, and those are tiny. They're 150 square feet, and we don't want to preclude those coming in. So we took that minimum out. Our maximum is a percentage of home size. It's the lesser of 60% of home size or 1,000 square feet. But the max square feet doesn't apply if the lot's larger than 1 acre. We have a lot of old platted areas with larger lots. So the approval process is pretty easy. You submit the application, some architectural drawings of the ADU, some photos of the existing home, and a property survey, and it's approved at the staff level because it's by right. It doesn't have to go anywhere, don't have to go to the board. Next slide. In addition, we have some incentives for building ADUs in our code. The minimum density in low density residential is 3 units per acre. And sometimes developers have trouble meeting that minimum, hard as that is to believe, but ADUs can count toward that minimum. So we don't have an issue so much with people bumping up against the maximum density. So we have them count because if someone's not meeting the minimum density, they can use them. We also have a requirement that in our subdivisions that you have a diversity of housing types. And And that's a tough one sometimes for home builders, but ADUs can count as a housing type. No parking is required, and the impact fees are not charged. So we have some of the highest impact fees in the state, but we consider ADUs de minimis, so we don't charge impact fees. There was one exception until recently, that was Celebration, and that's because Celebration, when it was permitted 20, 25 years ago, whenever that was, they wanted to do the ADUs, and we told them they don't have to count toward your entitlements, but we need to put in your PD that you'll be charged impact fees. And so they agreed to that, and now we're doing things exactly the opposite, that you can count them toward your entitlement, but you don't have to pay impact fees. So that's been corrected for Celebration as well. Next slide. So for us, we were looking at, who builds ADUs and what would be appropriate for Osceola County. We don't have a core like, a downtown. Counties don't generally have those. And so that the potential for infill is going to be limited. But there are different ways that ADUs get built. And so we were trying to figure out what's appropriate or what's going to happen, likely to happen in Osceola County. So, individual homeowners, ADU builders, that's basically the tiny home guy who will come put one in your backyard. And we tried to make that very easy for them to do as well. And then small builders who you'll see more in the core area with infill, and production builders. Next slide. So individuals, there's a number of ways to create an ADU, convert the garage, although that can be problematic because garages count as parking and most developers don't put in any more parking than they're required to do. So that's a tricky one. They can convert a bedroom, add square footage, or install that separate unit on the property. But there's a number of issues they'll run into. There are PDs that prohibit accessory dwelling units. And this photo actually is taken in one of those PDs, which is why you see undisclosed address. It's advertised on Zillow, but it's not permitted. HOAs sometimes don't allow them either. The people can be unfamiliar with, excuse me, the permitting and construction processes, and the cost may be prohibitive. Property appraisal can also be an issue because property appraisers sometimes don't know how to value that unit. I think it might be getting better in some places that have a lot of them. But even, I actually have an ADU in downtown Orlando, and I've had trouble getting my property appraised. They just don't value that unit enough. And then lifestyle. Do you want strangers living on your property? It's a consideration for people as they're going to build a unit. Next slide. So we have a number of unpermitted ADUs, as do most places. I found these all on Zillow. They're being advertised. The addresses are there, but they're clearly not permitted. And there's a number of ways to tell. If the garage is converted in some of these subdivisions, it's in all likelihood they've taken up some of the required parking. Partial kitchens. So that picture on the upper left is a partial kitchen. It's got a microwave, it's got some other things. What it doesn't have is a stove or a full-size refrigerator, but it's just for one person. Smaller square footage. They're not building a 400 square foot unit. They're converting or part of a garage. If they have room AC and the rest of the house is under central air, that's an indication as well. And also if the utilities are included in the rent because they're not separately metered. Or the entrance is in an odd place like the back on this sketchy unit down here at the bottom. So there's a lot of ways you can tell they're out there. We do know there's a lot of them out there. We don't tend to inspect or do anything about them unless someone calls code enforcement. But otherwise, they're existing everywhere. Next slide. Oh, yeah, I put this up not to scare you, but basically to show the potential for going back into a subdivision like that's been built and adding ADUs is going to be pretty minimal because the parking is just the bare amount they require and the houses take up a lot of the lot. And so when we're looking at infill, and this is a lot of what we're seeing developed, the idea of there being a lot of infill lots is just not there. The one thing I will say though is with household sizes dropping, more than half of households are 1 and 2 person. There is potential for someone in a house that's far too big for them to just convert part of the house, and then it's not an issue. But infill for us is not, there's not a lot of potential there. So next slide. This is Celebration. That's, and a lot of Celebrations units have accessory dwelling units. I heard at one point that only about half of them were rented out, but that may have changed. That was a good while ago. And they're nice sizable units. And they recently did get that condition in their PD taken out because they had people wanting to build accessory units and finding out $25,000 impact fees was a bit much. So we supported that change to their PD. Next slide. So let me get to production builders and go ahead and hit next slide. I have some stuff there. We know we've had one builder who's been building what this is a Lennar product. It's called the Next Gen House, where they build the accessory unit into the house. That's the only one, and I believe it's in a tourist type development. So we wanted to talk to the Home Builders Association and find out why they aren't built and what maybe could we do to encourage them. And what he told us was builders offer limited, if any, floor plans with ADUs. And I'll add to that in Central Florida, because I've seen almost every builder that's active here does have them somewhere, but they're not building them here. And he did tell us that the market in Osceola is perceived to be not ready, meaning not enough buyers who could afford new homes with ADUs. And then the market isn't demanding it right now. People aren't asking for it. And so those two kind of taken together tell me that the builders aren't really wanting to take the risk. And I will tell you that when I started Osceola County about 8 years ago, builders weren't willing to risk building townhomes in Osceola County up until somebody built townhomes, and then all of a sudden townhomes were a viable product. And so that's, I think, more a function of the reluctance to take that risk, especially on a speculative basis. The obstacles include impact fees, and I included this even though we don't charge impact fees, because if others in the area do, then they're not going to bother with a floor plan for one jurisdiction when they don't want to build it in others. And so there's some value in considering what's going on in their entire market. And then the other thing they said, multiple sets of rules by HOAs and municipalities on short-term rentals limit the owner's ability to capitalize on the investment. Next slide. And these are just some of the other multi-gen homes from different builders. And it does seem like building the unit in when the house is being built would be a cost-effective way to do this. And I think considering they're calling the next gen and multi-gen, they're looking at housing a family member, maybe an elderly family member, which is fine. But these are the sorts of things we'd like to see more of down in Osceola. Next slide. So what do we do next? For individuals, there's a number of things we could do, outreach and education. design assistance and permitting assistance for people who aren't at all familiar with the system, and maybe for people who can't really envision how to add something to their house. There could be an assistance program for them. For small home builders, if they're going to be active down there, lot identification would be valuable, I think, for them. But for the production builders, I think coordinating and being consistent across local governments with how we treat ADUs, what kind of allowances, what kind of incentives, I think that would help for them to feel a level of comfort with the rules being the same across the board. So that's kind of where we're at in Osceola. Next slide.
All right, hi everyone. This is Taylor and Carter. We're going to present for Orange County. So we recently passed, 4 years ago, an ordinance. So kind of going to go over our experience with that. Next slide. So prior to 2019, we actually have had an ADU ordinance since 1995. And before that, we allowed garage apartments in multifamily districts if you had a single family. But our 1995 ordinance for ADUs was very restricted. So it required a special exception, a public hearing, about a 4-month process in basically all residential or agricultural zoning districts. And it also required that the initial occupant of the ADU had to be a relative. So if you wanted an ADU, you had to both go for a special exception, and then even to apply for a special exception, you had to produce a relative that was going to live there for at least 3 years or until they died. And this led to that condition you can see over there. It's a little grim. That basically we would put that on every special exception ADU, that 3 years or until they die, whichever occurs first. We did have a few spots in the county where you could do them outright, which was Horizon West and Avalon Park, which are kind of our more contemporarily planned communities. And we had a couple subdivisions that are effectively just all mansions. So the ADUs aren't really the ADUs you would be thinking of. Next slide. And then in 2019, we decided to kind of update our ADU code. And the big thing we were doing was allowing it outright everywhere. And you saw on Allie's slide, we were one of those communities. So 2019, now you don't need a special exception. You can just go right to permitting. We also kind of updated the code that was with it to allow them a little bit more flexibility, a little bigger than they used to be allowed to be, and some other stuff. And basically just kind of made an ordinance to follow so people could go right to permitting. Next slide. So some of our general standards are probably a lot like the other communities. And I think if you went back to Allie's list, I think we do about 60% of the good stuff, probably 40% of the stuff wasn't recommended. We do require owner occupancy, and we have parking requirements. But generally, we let you have 50% of the living area, not to exceed 1,000 square feet. Then you can go a little bigger if your lot is bigger than 2 acres, which we have a decent amount of. And then if it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, in addition to the living area stuff, just has to meet the accessory dwelling or the accessory structure code. Our setbacks are pretty small, 5, if it's 1 story, it's 5 in the rear and whatever the side setback is. And then if it's 2 story, it's a little bigger setbacks, 15 foot in the rear. We require 1 extra parking space somewhere on site. One of our big things is that it has to be designed similar and compatible to the existing principal structure. So same finish, architectural, that kind of stuff. We do allow mobile homes as ADUs, but it has to be on an agricultural lot with 2 or more acres. We give detached units a separate meter and address, and then we have the owner occupancy. So basically, property has to have a homestead exemption, and owner has to live in either the ADU or the house. Next slide. So after we adopted this, and some of this is even before, one of the kind of big things we found was that the impact fees are always a major deterrent. So even though, now you didn't have to go through a public hearing or anything, on average, your impact fees for an ADU are like $9,000 to $10,000. So a lot of times what you would see is someone would submit an ADU, get permitted, get approved by everybody. Then they would get the bill, and then they would say, oh my goodness. And they would take out the kitchen, maybe put in one of those kitchens you might have seen on Susan's presentation, which is basically just a shelf. So it kind of, doesn't make it an ADU anymore, doesn't have the same character, doesn't get the same benefits. So one thing we did was change the impact fee ordinance, and we exempted ADUs from the transportation and school impact fees. Shortly after we passed the initial ordinance, we realized this and passed this ordinance. So now your impact fees for an ADU are much lower, about $1.75 thousand, $2,000. You pay for parks, fire, and law enforcement. Another issue we've kind of seen, and it's the same kind of thing, a permit will come through, it gets, approved, you're meeting all the code, but for attached ADU specifically, so those garage conversions or something where somebody's kind of adding onto the side, is our building department requires fire separation. They kind of treat it the same as if you had a duplex unit. So they make you fire rate those walls between the units. So, if you had existing drywall, now you got to make that a fire rated wall. So that can just be more challenging at construction. The cost to build that's a lot more expensive. Next slide. And then some zoning code issues we've seen, so we passed that initial ordinance, which kind of did improve what you could do. But we still see some issues with substandard lots of record. The county kind of encompasses the city or, surrounds it. And there's a lot of just older development that's on lots that are smaller than what the code allows today. So our code says your lot has to, meet whatever your zoning district is. We just have a lot of 50-foot lots where they're supposed to be 75, but there's, blocks and blocks of existing houses that would be ripe for infill, but they would require a variance to do an ADU because their lots are substandard. The complementary architecture, while the intent of it is obvious, trying to maintain neighborhood character, trying to make these, look better. It does kind of prevent some stuff, right? It prevents the conversion of existing buildings into ADUs that might otherwise, meet all the other code. Kind of prevents the prefab buildings from being used. A tiny home builder might have a tough time putting down a prefab building unless they happen to match the architecture perfectly. And another thing is, we don't really have architectural standards countywide. Some places we do, most places we don't. So, if you have an ugly house, now you're stuck with having an ugly ADU. So that can be an issue, right? You have an older house, maybe you want to do an ADU that looks good. It could be tough. We have variance processes for that, but it just, obviously that adds a little bit to it. Another one issue we've kind of run into is mobile homes on uses on smaller lots where you could already have a mobile home. So we have a couple different mobile home districts that, you could still have an acre lot, but our code doesn't allow mobile homes as ADUs. So even though you could have a mobile home as a principal structure, you couldn't have two mobile homes, or if you wanted to build another house, you still couldn't use the other mobile home as an ADU. When we first passed the ordinance as well, we had an issue. So where we already allowed it, ADUs in Horizon West, we fixed the code a little bit, and it turned out what we did was we just made square footages different. So we have fixed that with a code update. But it was kind of a trial and error. We realized, where we were already allowing them, now we have to kind of amend that part of the code. And then another kind of big trend that also seems to be happening in the county is people have existing lots, usually bigger lots, quarter acre, half acre lots that have an existing house on it. They want to use that house as an ADU and build a much bigger house, but the existing house doesn't necessarily meet the intent or the code of ADUs. It's usually too big, has too many bedrooms. So that's something we've seen a few variances for, or challenges people trying to do that. Next slide.
Yep. So thanks, Taylor. Again, my name is Carter Gresham. I'm one of the designers and planners within the placemaking and community development teams here at Orange County Planning. But while Taylor's worked and kind of had a conversation and a dialogue about ordinances and kind of the legislative side of it and the zoning side of it, we wanted to kind of shift our gears and kind of shift our focus to implementation and the tools that we use here at the county, not only for ADUs, but other kind of ordinance rollouts to ensure that we're getting the message to the people and ensuring that we're finding ways that these things can actually be implemented. So two of the tools that you'll see on your screen are one of those things, and actually I think Heather was just sending a comment out right now. The ADU quick reference guide is the first thing that we'll talk about in depth. That actually, I believe, is part of the handout link that was sent a little while ago, so feel free to leaf through that at your leisure after the meeting. But what we do is we kind of use these quick reference guides for ADUs, missing middle, different types of ordinance rollouts to ensure that what is being brought out in these ordinances is palatable, legible, and understandable by the public, and to kind of walk them through the process. The other thing that I'll hit on a little bit is the pre-approved master building files. We're actually in the process of that, so that is very much a work in progress, but I'll hit on that slightly in just a couple minutes. Next slide. All right, so with the quick reference guide, as I mentioned, we kind of want to shift gears and start to look at the idea that visualization is key, helping people actually understand how to go through the process, how to build these ADUs, but also how to envision these ADUs on their property. A lot of times that is really kind of the obstacle for them. They really don't think it's something within their budget or something within kind of their overall idea or vision for their property. And what I'll do is there are four major kind of items or kind of topics we always want to do, especially in the ADU quick reference guide, but really in any of our quick reference guides here at Orange County. understand the process, really kind of walk them through step by step what each kind of phase of the project and permitting and development and design review will look like, so they fully understand the process. Describe the intent. Why are we actually pushing these ADUs? Why I kind of explain the housing crisis in Orange County, Central Florida, and Florida as a whole, so that people really understand the intent of ADUs and how kind of finding ways to help combat that crisis a bit also helps them and serves them in their own property. Show real world examples. A lot of times, as I've already mentioned, visualization is key. A lot of people have some trepidation and some apprehension when it comes to building something that maybe they don't see a lot of. So showing them real world examples, showing them built ADUs in Orange County can help them to kind of get past that apprehension and kind of move forward. And then finally, again, kind of coming full circle in these reference guides, kind of get the ball rolling, use these reference guides as catalytic kind of documents to say, okay, you're interested, let's go. Let's jump off the cliff and kind of let's just go for it now and get the ball rolling. Next slide. So what we're going to do is I kind of built in actually each of these sheets. So we'll click through them really quickly. But again, I just kind of went over, these are the steps that are actually in the reference guide talking about fast track permitting, approval, and then all the way to temporary certificates of occupancy and certificates of occupancy. Next slide. And you can hit it again. So this one, we're actually kind of looking at accessory dwelling units and what the intent of these ADUs are, the kind of the ongoing housing stock issues that we have in Orange County. Next slide. And the last couple sheets of the ADU reference guide are really showing those different elements of built precedents, built existing ADUs in Orange County, in Florida, nationally. We want to make sure that people can see detached, next slide, detached or attached ADUs so that people can really visualize it and start to kind of get an idea in their head of what a ADU would look like, helping to complement their home. Next slide. And then the last one, again, coming full circle in that process, going through, okay, we've gone over process, we've gone over precedents, we've gone over the intent. How do we get the ball rolling? Here are your contact, here's the contact information or the specific questions that you may have, just to really get you getting kind of on your way for those ADUs and that implementation. Next slide. All right, so we're going to shift gears again. So talking about visualization, one of the really great things about Orange County is we also have a group in the planning department, in the planning division, placemaking and community development. We're all people with planning backgrounds, but came from the design world. So we have, my background is landscape architecture and urban design, and we have several different other staff members who have architecture and urban design backgrounds. So what we do as a county is on any kind of these special projects, or let's say a committee or a land trust or a committee having a lot of different properties, are thinking about how to redevelop their sites and they want to factor in ADUs or they want to factor in increased density, they can come to us and we can create graphics like these in front of you. Where we can show, look, let's do single family homes, but you want to kind of infuse a little bit and kind of integrate a little bit more density in these neighborhoods. Okay, let's have a conversation about ADUs. So that yellow highlight around all of these, they're all detached and attached ADUs that we have used in the past for people to really understand pretty clearly that architecturally these ADUs or increased density is not changing the feel or the character or the architectural quality of these neighborhoods. If anything, it's kind of celebrating it and reflecting it. Next slide. And again, we'll do these, there you go. We'll also do these plans too, so that people can see kind of the actual massing of these ADUs is still kind of in keeping with a single family detached community, but still allowing people to really kind of see that, look, these ADUs can be built, are being built, and really are if anything, an extension of the existing neighborhoods, and they're really not meant to be in any conflict. Next slide. All right, and then so the last one I want to talk on, I hit on it slightly about these kind of pre-approved master building files. We're now about 30% complete or 30% submittal, where we're working with a consultant to essentially devise pre-approved or pre-reviewed architectural floor plans and essentially a construction set of a couple different ADUs. We're doing that, one, to ensure that while there are 6 or 7 sets of these drawings, we want to ensure that we're not getting cookie cutter ADUs or the same ADU over and over and over again around the county. So we felt that doing 1 or 2 floor plans would essentially lead to that. So we're ensuring that we want to make sure that our housing stock, it has a diversity to it and has a, our housing stock, again, is reflecting the existing architecture and existing quality of these established neighborhoods. So what you'll see on your screen, these are just kind of some images that I just pulled. They're not the plans, but different, looking at different type of typologies above garages and freestanding detached ADUs. Obviously, doing pre-approved drawings for an attached ADU would be a bit difficult because obviously every house is built different. So they're really focusing on those detached ADUs or building a garage in the back and furnishing an ADU on the top floor. But again, the last kind of 2 major points on these tools are, 1, ensuring that we have a varied housing stock. In Orange County, we have a lot of multifamily and a lot of single family. We really want to ensure that we're finding ways to kind of celebrate and infuse the housing stock with more of that missing middle as well as ADUs. And then also to kind of look at how we can streamline the permitting process and get essentially from someone showing interest to a certificate of occupancy as quickly as possible to ensure that we're increasing, again, that housing stock in Orange County. Next slide.
And then some challenges and just kind of other recent lessons learned. You know, we had to roll out a new permit type and process. Our ordinance passed, I want to say, in November of 2019. So within 3 months, then COVID happened, and our office closed, and we basically changed the way we do all permits. You know, we used to have people come into the building, meet with a staff member to basically figure out what they're permitting and go from there. Now everything's online, so it's on the applicants to apply for everything, and you know, that can be very difficult for them. So there was some trial and error of that, and then there's other trial and error of just, you know, what if they're doing an attached ADU with a new SFR in the community, the communication with other departments about that, you know, when looking at it as a house, but hey, it's actually a house with an ADU, difficult to track. Just same thing, updating when changes happen because of, you know, those building codes or impact fees when people are changing their stuff. The mostly internal stuff just between different county divisions that we were all kind of learning it at the same time. Other things that, you know, are just kind of general challenges is that the owner occupancy requirement. You know, that homestead is required, but you know, it's kind of a chicken and the egg when you're building a new house. You want to build a new house with the ADU, you don't have a homestead until you complete the house. So, you know, we've been allowing it because we certainly don't want to stand in the way of that, but you know, it doesn't make it kind of down the road. You sell your house, so you know the person's like, oh, I'm just going to rent both of them out. Issues on both sides, right? Hard to police, and then, you know, for our code enforcement officers, also just hard to go out there and say, oh, you don't have a homestead exemption, and it can be a deterrent for people. But done, you know, we have other code updates up to change some stuff, kind of to make those the prefab ones that Carter was just talking about a little more possible. But those are the challenges we've kind of really faced in the last 4 years having passed this ordinance. Next slide.
Hello, guys. So I'm Jessica Fry with the City of Orlando, and I'm with Paul. And before we start, I did want to give a special thanks to Fernanda Pernetto and Nancy Otini on their contribution to this. And so I think we can continue on. Thanks for staying and sticking around. So the first thing we want to talk about is the city's ongoing review of our population, how it grows. And one thing is our 2020 population was about 307,000. 2023, we're already at 330,000 based on our planning estimates. Single family units, we have about 44,000 or about 30%. And then our multifamily is about 105,000 with the 2023 number for ADUs around 1,200. And that's kind of how we differ from our county and our neighboring county, is that we have about a 63% rental rate and about 37% home ownership rate. So, you know, rental options and being able to, with gentle increases in density, just trying to integrate it where we can to get more housing supply. The 2050 projected population is about 468,000. And, you know, the city does still continue to grow, especially in that southeast sector, and we have about 119 square miles. Next slide. So some historical context on the city of Orlando and, how we started to go down this path and change our codes is that between 2016 and 2018, there were a series of workshops as part of the Regional Affordable Housing Initiative, and it included Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County. The initiative partner organizations produced a final report, and one of those recommendations, and what the city kind of saw as low-hanging fruit, we definitely could integrate this pretty easily, is that including ADUs and really strengthening our code to allow that in more places and make it make it easier. So, and then one of our biggest steps too is also, much as our friends in Orange County mentioned, we really want to integrate more missing middle and making it easier for that. So next slide. So I did want to touch briefly as we're talking through this as ADUs as a housing strategy. Not only do they increase housing options and making it more inclusive options, in our single family neighborhoods, is also, as a entity that receives SHIP funding, that's the State Housing Initiative Partnership funding, we are required to have an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. And one of those recommendations and requirements that we have to review every year is affordable accessory residential dwelling units. It's one of the strategies to increase housing. So, our AHAC has been very active. They are very interested in ADUs as supporting our housing crisis. So in 2020 and our 2022 AHAC reports, they really want us to further try to incentivize the development of ADUs and provide more education on how the public can provide and pursue such opportunities. So next slide. I did want to get a little bit into our ADU fee structure and our impact fees. I did want to let everybody know that our school impact fees, just like Orange County, are exempt for ADUs, and really appreciate Orange County and OCPS on that effort. Our transportation impact fees, we just recently went to a tiered version. And so that means, our single family units, it's based on square footage. And so part of that, how we integrate new ADUs, is that we have the existing square footage plus the added square footage from the ADU, and then you get that difference. So if you don't exceed, if you have about a 1,400 square foot unit and you add 500 square feet and it's 1,900, well, it doesn't exceed that 2,000 square foot, you don't have to pay the fee. But if you do, you pay the difference. And then for new, you have the 2 multifamily units. And then our sewer and park impact fees are assessed as 2 multifamily units instead of a single family and a multifamily. So we kind of built in some cost savings that way. So, next slide. And I'm going to pass this over to Paul.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jessica. And I just wanted to touch base on a couple of the larger standards in relation to our particular ordinance. So our ADU ordinance allows them to be placed in residential, office, and mixed-use residential zoning districts. So it's multiple districts are allowed. Obviously, you can have them next to single-family homes or adjacent to or attached to an office, which is a little bit different than you might see in some other locations. You can attach them, obviously, the principal structure, detached in a separate building or above a garage. Our maximum is 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet on large lots. There's some variability in our historic districts, and you can see those there. And then we also have a maximum floor area ratio of 0.5, which includes the principal structure and the ADU. Next slide, please. Parking requirements. So for us, there is none for an ADU of 500 square feet or less. You do have to have one independent space for ADUs that are 501 square feet to 1,000, or I'm sorry, above. And so there's some variability there. Setbacks, basically, they're the same as the zoning district setbacks for principal structures. So typically 25 feet for the rear and 5 to 7 feet for the sides. and that's for attached structures. And then for detached, basically they're the same as accessory structures in our code. So up to 12 feet tall, 5 feet for the rear, and above that, above 12 feet, the setback is 15. And then side yard setbacks match the principal structure setback. Next slide, please. So some talk about relief. When a lot is non-conforming in size, the applicant can pursue a variance through our Board of Zoning adjustment to allow an ADU up to 500 square feet. When that ADU is up to 500 square feet is when the two-story building, the applicant can pursue an administrative mod or a modification of standards to have the same side yard setback applied to the rear yard. That unfortunately does not apply in historic preservation districts, so it's a little different there. And then in our Southeast Orlando sector plan area, which is kind of our area north around Lake Nona and other in those environs, you can have an ADU up to 1,000 square feet on any residential lot, regardless of the lot's square footage. So setbacks change with each development out in that network. It's an area of a lot of PDs. Next slide. There are appearance review standards for our ADUs. They have to be designed to appear to be part of the principal dwelling unit or office. They should have the exterior finish at the same exterior finish as the principal structure, same architectural style with the same windows, doors, roof style, cornice detailing, vents, and all those good stuff. Alternative style materials can be approved when evidence is provided that demonstrates the architecture of the ADU and the principal structure will not be out of character with the surrounding neighborhood. So there's a little flexibility there. So shipping containers, that's an idea of shipping containers converted to ADUs. If there's any questions about that, we can talk about shipping containers a little bit more. We haven't seen a whole lot of proposals for them, and it has a lot to do with the cost of creating those. And anyway, next slide, please. So similar to Orange County, we do have a fact sheet that kind of goes through and helps to visualize how you can do an ADU and goes through the process. But we also have, I wanted to mention this, is a service page on at City of Orlando, or www.orlando.gov. And if you download this presentation, you'll be able to use the link over on the right-hand side of this to get to this. But basically, what the service page does is lead you step by step through the what ADUs are, what the development standards are, and then the process you would need to go through to get permitted for your ADU. So it's a very, I think, a fairly friendly process from that perspective. But I will let you explore that at your own leisure. The next slide, please. So we were asked to talk about the effectiveness of our code amendment, and I wanted to give you some big numbers. So the first number there is 656, and that's actually the number of ADUs that received certificates of occupancy in the city of Orlando between January 2007 and May 31st of this year. Now, the reason I have that data is because I've actually been maintaining that data for the last 15 years. Because you never know when you'll have to do a presentation on ADUs. Interestingly, in Orlando, and I think this is probably true in some areas of Orange County as well, is that we have a lot of units that are in our new urbanist areas. So the next number is 321. That's the number of ADUs which received C of Os in the 11 years prior to our 2018 code amendment. So that's not bad. It's 321 units. That's good. The vast majority of those were located in Baldwin Park and Lake Nona's Laureate Park, and only 16 were located outside of those greenfield southeast sector areas. So that's only about 5% of the total 321 units built. The next number is 335, and that's the number of ADUs which received C of Os in the nearly 5 years since the 2018 code amendment. Again, most of those new ADUs were located in the Southeast Sector Plan area. In this case, it was 272 units in Lake Nona and Story Park, while 63 received C of Os in the remainder of the city, and that's about 18% of the total 335 built in that time period. So some things that we, conclusions, new urbanist projects do provide us an opportunity to expand the missing middle residential building types available in greenfield and redevelopment areas. Again, that's about 577 ADUs built in those areas since 2007. We believe that the land development codes adopted in 2018 had a significant and positive impact in terms of the number of ADUs being built outside of those greenfield and new development areas, with both the number of units and the percentage built increasing from 16 and 5% built in the 11 years prior to the 2018 code amendment, and up to 63 and 18 or almost 19% of ADUs built in the 5 years after. Having said all that, we do firmly believe that we need to do some additional education and outreach to really better inform people about this particular option. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you a couple of uncommon examples, and I've been told, and I understand that this is not actually an ADU. This is actually a what's called a casita unit in Laureate Park in Lake Nona, and I wanted to show it primarily because it's cool. But this one provides bonus living space in the front. There is no kitchen, so it's not an ADU. But that front unit faces the main street, and the main house is actually to the rear and is alley accessed. Next slide, please. This is the mother-in-law suite in Story Park, in the Story Park PD. And the mother-in-law suite ADU is front-loaded, features an integrated floor plan with the ADU projecting out towards the street. And actually, a good number of these have actually been built, 52 units since 2019, and this was designed and built by Lennar. I'm sorry that the picture on the right-hand upper side is so detailed, but you can probably see where you do have separate entries for the ADU plus the main house. Okay, next slide. So this is kind of an exciting announcement that I get to make today, because today was the day that the AARP announced all of their Community Challenge grant winners across the country. And Orlando was chosen as to receive an award here of this grant. And the grants, the AARP Community Challenge grants range from about $2,500 to $50,000, and they're different kind of categories: placemaking, transportation, housing. We received a $10,000 grant in the housing category, specifically pertaining to ADUs, where we'll be doing an ADU education and outreach campaign to raise awareness of ADUs. And what we're going to be trying to do is focus on a number of different multicultural settings, areas where where there may not be as much experience with homeowners with this particular housing type. The campaign it really aligns with our city's Livable Orlando Age-Friendly Action Plan, which we adopted in September of last year. Really where we have a commitment for a community for a lifetime, where we're trying to implement age-friendly initiatives and advance also the city's housing vision to ensure residents of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds have equitable access to housing. So the major components of that particular program, we'll be doing some interviews with homeowners and residents, as well as some outreach to subject area experts like financial institutions, real estate agencies, agents, elder services providers, and nonprofits. Also, we'll be working with our two boards that kind of, or advisor boards that have interest in this area. Jessica mentioned the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and also our Mayor's Committee on Livability and Healthy Aging will be very interested in this. Our product, aside from the community engagement, there will be a series of those. It'll probably happen, we're thinking in late September, October, and November. But before we are able to do that, we will be developing some additional materials, including a couple different visuals, an ADU educational brochure, maybe a brochure that talks about why you would build an ADU, kind of the why and that kind of good stuff. And then also, similar to the county's approach, we want to have some type of what we're calling at this point a visual scrapbook, whether or not it actually is called a visual scrapbook at the end of the day. We don't know that quite yet. So we're excited that process is getting launched. Literally, again, today was the day that the AARP announced their stuff, so we're allowed to announce it. I have interviews later today with the Sentinel and with WESH, so we'll see if that gets any coverage from our local press as well. We kind of hope so, because part of what we're trying to do is raise awareness, right? So I think that's about all I have, and I guess we can go to the next slide and move on into questions.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. So I've been monitoring for questions, and Paul, you were also just awarded an award of excellence for the project awards for your age friendliness as well.
Yes, we were. I'll read what that was. That was our Livable Orlando Action Plan, selected for an APA Florida Award of Excellence in the Innovation and Planning for All Ages category. So we're
While you
very,
were
very
tooting
happy
your
about
horn, I wanted to add to the symphony of toots.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so just reading through some of the questions, there's just one comment from Sarah in Collier County that says, good afternoon, everyone. Sharing for the benefit of others, Collier County is revising policy to allow ADUs to be used as affordable housing. Open to receiving input from others, lessons learned, feedback. Please feel free to reach me. She gives her email, so I will share that with everybody, and I will share her email address when I'll email everything that Heather and Tammy have provided to all attendees. The next question is, I believe, Allie, this is towards you. How have school districts dealt with ADUs in terms of any student capacity demands? You're muted, Allie.
Thanks. That's something I could probably follow up in an email. If you wanted to shoot that out to me, I could touch base with my team and see what information we have on that. I do know that there have been some partnerships with schools in terms of funding for teacher housing, but would have to look a little bit more into practices around student generation rates. And I don't know if there's some other information from the communities who are talking today on that point.
Okay, Susan, this one is for you. How many ADUs would be allowed on a lot greater than 1 acre?
I don't think it distinguishes. I think it's 1 ADU per lot, regardless of size.
Okay. Let me see here. What kinds of opposition, this is for everybody, what kinds of opposition concerns, if any, have you all seen or experienced from people who do not want to live near properties with ADUs?
I'll jump in on this. We've heard this in Orange County is currently updating their Vision 2050, their comprehensive plan. It's called Vision 2050. And some of the conversations we've had 18 town halls over the last month or so. And some of the concerns that we've had are its impacts on kind of traffic, because obviously when we're bringing an ADU per lot, obviously we're probably not building in every lot with an ADU. But there are some concerns about and a little bit of hesitation about what kind of demands that puts on, let's say, subdivisions, roadways. So that's something that we've definitely been looking at, but it's absolutely something that has come up in the past, literally a couple weeks ago, just with some major concerns about if parking is not being enveloped or kind of integrated on these lots, where is the parking being integrated? Are they just expected to not have a car? Are they parking on the street? Those types of questions. Ours, I believe our code, Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in the presentation, ours goes over, there needs to be a parking spot per ADU, but there are definitely some concerns on that end from people.
In Osceola, our code originally said the ADU could be 60% of the primary unit. The reason we added in the 1,000 square feet was we're getting a lot of very large houses, which means you can also get a very large ADU. And so we had to add that secondary limit to it.
Okay. Owen wrote a very long question. I'm going to whittle it down for you, Owen. His two questions are, the main question is, with the current property insurance crisis, are you hearing any sort of rumblings about any issues getting these property owners having these ADUs insured? And a couple comments, people just want to know if you can expand a little bit more on the challenges of financing.
Yeah, so I definitely have been hearing a lot about the property insurance, as well as flood insurance and all of those coverages. So that I haven't heard rumblings myself. That is something I could also circle back with and just see if that's something that the rest of my team has been hearing about as well. As far as financing goes, I think some of the high points that I laid out is just kind of encouraging and figuring out avenues to get more access to financing for people who might not be able to access that. And so I do think that maybe part of that is through, I think that is a role for local government. I think that can include looking at some of those additional revenue sources. We have some guidance on using SHIP money for that. I believe one community was using ARP funds for that. So that might be a starting point as far as increasing access. On the private lending side, I think some of those practices are going to kind of evolve as the federal lending standards are reevaluated, and as those conversations continue. Not to say that's exactly where that's all going to land, so I think that's kind of looking at what's happening in a meta way, and then also looking at what sorts of funding sources are around locally to help just increase access to those resources.
And I would just add one of the things that we want to do as part of this effort with the AARP and our age-friendly efforts is to get a better handle on cost comparisons of an ADU option for an older resident or an older person versus the cost of assisted living facilities or in-home care, that type of thing, so that people can make a logical decision or a logical financial decision about whether or not an ADU makes sense for them or for their particular situation. I don't have the answers to that, but it's something that I think that we all need to think about a little bit when we're considering our ADUs. If you're thinking about it from, equity through an age-friendly lens. So I'll shut up. Jessica, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that?
Well, and I think that was one of the things and why we were really we found it really important to reach out to our financial lenders to talk about these things and see how we can get more engagement for the infill, because we were seeing it a lot in our Story Park and Laureate Park in our southeast sector, because we allow it and they can kind of do it at the upfront when they get their mortgage. So how do we expand that to more infill when you already are in your mortgage, you're already there? And so we did talk a little bit about equity and options there, but I think the average homeowner just needs to be educated on those things, and maybe getting them near somebody who deals with this on the day-to-day or can kind of help them through that, can maybe take some of that scariness away, that they just just like, oh, that would be nice, and then they come back later. It's just not on the forefront of their mind.
Okay, Carter and Taylor, this might be more for you. Do you generally adopt ADU language within any part of your comprehensive plans? If so, can you provide any examples?
I would have to follow up. The document's about 450 pages, so I will look through to make sure. I know when it talks about, there's extensive language about missing middle. Talking about that, I'm actually working on a reference guide for missing middle that's going to be rolled out for the county. So that's kind of also factoring in ADUs, but also factoring in stacked duplexes, triplexes, those types of housing inventory that we really don't see much in the county. So I can follow up with that in the email. But I know there's a lot of different kind of integration of that and those different housing strategies. Orange Code, our update to the actual zoning code, gets into a little bit more of the kind of the meat and potatoes of all of this, and the actual kind of I don't know, body of this, and that actually gets into the actual zoning and the kind of the intricacies of all of it. But I can follow up in your email, Al.
Jessica, Paul, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's references to it, but I don't have the direct ones in front of me.
Okay.
I know our housing
All right.
element has some stuff.
Yeah. It's general language. It's supportive of ADUs, but I don't think it's anything earth-shattering or groundbreaking. Well,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it with the questions. Heather and Tammy, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Patty, and thanks everyone for asking your questions, and to our wonderful presenters today. I hope you all found this webinar very helpful. I know I did. Here in St. Cloud, we're working on our ordinance and hopefully pass something in the next couple of months for St. Cloud on ADUs, so we're excited about that. And we hope you join us for future events as well. So you can follow us on LinkedIn, just search for Orlando Metro section, and we're always posting there things that are coming up. Here on this corner, you can see a few events that we have coming up in July. We have our OMS Connect event that happens every Friday, second Friday of the month at noon. It's just an online opportunity to meet and talk just between planners and ask questions, get overall support, anything that you have going on, projects, and just networking in general. Our happy hour in July will be in Sanford, and our next free webinar that will also have a law CM credit to it will be on the recently passed Live Local Act and how that will impact community development and what we're doing in our communities. So make sure you attend that as well. And I just want to thank again our presenters and everything that they did to make this event happen, and thank OMS and the Florida chapter for supporting this event as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.
There you go.